So for today's episode, I am excited to chat with Paige Guzman. Focusing in the food, non-alc, and functional beverage industries, Paige advises founders, investors, retailers, and agencies on how to successfully navigate these burgeoning industries to drive revenue and brand value. Currently, Paige serves as VP of Marketing for Mezzetta, 4 generations of a family-owned San Francisco-based, nationally distributed food company famous for their wide variety of oils, sauces, and peppers. They look really good, by the way. Prior to that, Paige served as Chief Marketing Officer for Lagunitas Brewing in lovely Petaluma, California, where she revitalized this cherished brand that makes a damn good IPA and began to expand the portfolio with new offerings like their Hoppy Refresher non-alc beverage. Prior to that, Paige worked in the cannabis startup space with PAX, and prior to that, spent time in marketing roles with Constellation and Beam. Paige has had the good fortune to work with a bevy of brands with incredible stories to tell, some well-established and some new to the industry. Suffice it to say, she's left an indelible mark wherever she's been, and her experience across these categories will make for a fantastic conversation today. Paige, my friend, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
I know. I should have mentioned she's also a proud University of Colorado alum. So, Coach Prime's doing big things this year. We were just talking about that before we started recording.
But there's a story. I actually started at the University of Colorado, and then I left and graduated from Boston University. So my entire family went to CU, but I graduated from BU because I had to be a little different.
You know what? I'm just going to, having grown up in Denver myself, I know for a fact you're not the first person who started at Colorado who didn't finish at Colorado.
But at least I didn't flunk out.
No. You just got smart and changed your major and went to the East Coast. So there you go. Thank you for the very important correction. But so we'd like to start out these conversations to first encourage our guests to share their story with our audience. So, Paige, tell us about your story.
Sure. So I always say that I proudly grew up in the Midwest, and I think that's important. I'm from Chicago originally, and my dad was an Eagle Scout. And the reason that's important is because I talk fast, I think fast, I move fast, but I'm always prepared, and what's fair is fair. And I went to school in Colorado and in Boston and spent my last year in London, and I have a great love for travel, and especially in Western Europe and the Caribbean. But really got my start in public relations and had a great first couple of years in my career in public relations. And when you're 21 years old, you basically, at my age, you made what you earned your age. So if you're 21, you made 21,000. You're 22, you made 22,000.
You did better than me.
Yeah, this was back in the early aughts, and I remember when I first crossed the 50,000 mark, I wasn't 50 years old, so I was really, really stoked about that. But yeah, I worked at agencies and had the good fortune to work on great liquor brands like Herradura Tequila and Bombay Sapphire. And at 22, 23 years old, when you're working on liquor brands and getting free liquor and attending and throwing parties, you think that is a dang good job, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And there's stories behind beverage alcohol brands, right? There's the founder story and the legacies of the families that have sustained those brands through prohibition and all of the taxes and challenges and multinationals that have purchased and sold them over the years. So I got a taste for that life. And thankfully was recruited into Jim Beam, I think at the ripe age of 25, and started in PR, but quickly started wondering who these brand managers were and why they held all the budgets and all the power, and wanted to figure out how I could become a brand manager. But I didn't have those 3 little letters after my name. They're MBA. Didn't have that, and didn't have at the time $100,000 or 2 years to go spend on one. But thankfully I had an amazing CMO. Tom Hernquist is his name. He's still alive, who believed in me and supported me in becoming an associate brand manager at Jim Beam. And I was very lucky to work on one of the preeminent whiskey brands in the world now, Knob Creek. But it was a baby brand at the time. We were trying to build this small batch bourbon collection and convince people who were drinking.
Which was barely a thing back then, right?
They were drinking Absolute vodka and maybe, Bombay Sapphire to drink super premium whiskey. And I ended up working for Jim Beam for 10 years. I bled bourbon. I love that company. I worked on bevy of their brands from Lafroig single malt whiskey, which when you are a 27-year-old working on Islay single malt scotches and traveling over to Scotland 2 or 3 times a year, it sounds really glamorous, but when you don't drink single malt scotch because you're a 27-year-old female who thinks it smells like Band-Aids and campfires,
You haven't
it's,
developed the palate for the peaty stuff yet?
I smoked a pack a day at that time. So towards the end, I think my palate was burnt off and I
Oh
enjoyed
my
it, but
gosh.
now
Oh,
I
wow.
don't. But long story short, I left Beam. Beam moved me to California. I spent a couple of years in the field, and I eventually got recruited to Constellation. As you know, I worked in innovation for Constellation for 7 years. I got the taste for the cannabis industry while Constellation was looking at entering the
Yep.
cannabis business. Hop to PAX. As they say, if you think the regulatory environment in beverage alcohol is crazy, go to cannabis and you'll come running back. And had my second baby and thought, wow, I really miss beverage alcohol and being relaxed. So I joined the Heineken organization to go turn around Lagunitas. How it wasn't relaxing. 3 of the hardest years of my career. And at the end of July of last year, took a break from that and have started consulting and then joined the Mezzetta family earlier this year. So it's been a ride. But as I say, I've had the pleasure of working on cocktails, Cabernet, cannabis, craft beer, and now Castelvetranos. And all the brands I've worked on have a story and they help adult consumers relax. So I wouldn't have it any other way.
That's an amazing alliteration with a wonderful consumer benefit at the end. So I like how you spelled all that out. Talk about, talk about, I want to go to your last 2 stops. So with Mezzetta, talk about that story, because 4 generations of a family, there's a lot of what's unique about the San Francisco area or the Bay Area, in my experience, is that there's a lot of brands that have amazing heritage and amazing stories there, whether it's C's Candies or, Lagunitas, just right outside the Bay Area. But talk about Mezzetta and their story, which is really, really interesting.
Sure. So Giuseppe Luigi came over from Italy in the early 1920s and missed the foodstuffs of his country. In early 1920s in San Francisco, they didn't have a lot of roasted red peppers and capers and the things that he loved. So we started a small importing business in the North Beach neighborhood, which those of you that have had the pleasure of visiting beautiful San Francisco know that North Beach today is still the Italian neighborhood of San Francisco.
Yep.
And he opened a small storefront and he was importing products from San Francisco or from Italy. And then he started selling those products to bars and restaurants in the North Beach area. And it was a small business for many, many years. I think, we talk a lot about it being almost a 100-year-old brand coming up on 100 years soon. But it wasn't until really the 80s and 90s. So Giuseppe Luigi then passed it on to his son. He kept the business going. And then his son, Jeff's father, really built the Mezzetta brand into a grocery store brand. He was the one in the 80s and 90s that started to build the distribution eastward. So we've always been, not always, but bigger in the West than the East. For those that look at, Nielsen or IRI numbers on a day-to-day basis, we now have about 90% ACV or, ubiquitous practically distribution in California in a lot of our products. But Jeff and his father really coined the Mezzetta brand name and then made it into a CPG or a consumer packaged goods product. They're the ones that came up with "Don't Forget a Mezzetta," which was a little jingle, and the ad had a lady's finger with a tie string. Remember when you would tie a string on your finger?
Oh yeah.
So when you go to the grocery store, you don't forget the Mezzetta.
Oh my Lord.
And they've partnered with all kinds of different people. They had a TV campaign with Julius Peppers a number of years ago. And they've, still privately held, so we don't disclose revenue numbers, but I will tell you that since Jeff has taken it over, he has significantly increased the revenue over the last 20 years. And he is the CEO today and is in the office every day, and really continuing to drive the business. And now we're really focusing, if we have such ubiquitous distribution,
Right.
really focused on telling the story of the brand and the products and the quality, because so much of Jeff's focus in his early years was driving quality of the products. And there were a lot of suppliers that he weeded out because they couldn't meet our quality standards.
Hmm.
He says when he'd arrived to Greece or Italy to meet with the suppliers, a lot of them would, shake their heads and be frustrated because he'd return a lot of the loads that they were trying to sell to him. And they had a lot of choice words in their native tongues for him. But it paid off. And the ones that are with us today are many of them are the ones that have been with us for 20, 25 years. And we have handsomely increased their purchase orders as well. So
Nice.
it has paid off for them to deal with the ones that are difficult.
That's a great story. So moving up into Sonoma County a little bit, Lagunitas, talk about a unique brand story there, because not only is it, one of the very early craft breweries, but basically bringing IPA into the mainstream. So talk about what it was stepping into that brand with such a unique founder story, and how that brand has evolved and the sort of interesting place in beer culture and even counterculture that it has.
Yeah. So Tony McGee founded that brand in 1993. In Sonoma County. He was a backyard basement brewer. He literally bought his first home brewing kit out of the back of High Times magazine. It's a fantastic magazine. For those of you that enjoy cannabis, you'll be very familiar with it. And Tony was a printer. He worked in the printing business and was just a hobby brewer for many years, but he stumbled upon this recipe and started selling it to local bars and restaurants, similar to 100 years ago, Giuseppe Luigi at Mezzetta. And I'll say about Californians, we love a good story and a local product, and especially we love to buy from the local maker, right?
Yeah.
And Tony continued to expand the brand and brought along a merry ship of fools, as they refer to themselves lovingly, a group of probably about 20 people that truly built that brand into the behemoth that it became, through sponsorships and music and community donations. And it was truly built by giving back to the community and supporting it and introducing the world to the beauty of the India Pale Ale style of beer. Continued to do that until it was about the 2010, 2013. There were rumors that they were selling cannabis out of the brewery. There was a sting operation, and every Thursday night there were these parties at 420. And, everybody knew that the brewers were smoking weed, but the Department of Alcohol tried to buy cannabis from our brewers, and they would only give them a joint. So the story goes that the agents came in and said, "Hey, man, can I buy some weed from you?" And the guy's like, "I'm not going to sell it to you, but I'll give you this joint." So that's generally how stoners are. We're happy to give you anything we have. And they ended up arresting them, and they were arrested because they were consuming cannabis on the premises where they were making alcohol. They weren't actually selling it.
Huh.
So they shut down the brewery for 30 days. And when they reopened, Tony really stuck it to the man. And the first beer that they created afterwards was called Undercover Shutdown Ale. And it was one of their bestsellers. So,
oh my gosh.
They, continued on with their merry band of fools for many, many years, and that band of fools made out like bandits when they sold the brand to Heineken for about $1 billion. And now Heineken has full ownership of it and has brought it globally. and they now brew, I think, in 7 sites globally.
Wow.
I, you can find, I get pictures from friends that are on a beach in Greece or, somewhere in Africa, and they are drinking Lagunitas.
That's amazing. So, like you said, you've been fortunate to be in some places that have had these amazing origin stories. How do you, and there's a lot of, especially alc-bev companies that manufacture brands out of nothing just because that there's a category opportunity there for, hey, let's spin up a little bit different version of this vodka and call it that, and maybe we can make some money out of it. But in your experience, at least in my experience, those ones that actually have real meat to their genesis and to their origins, those are the ones that tend to endure and tend to have a much wider palette to play from a branding perspective. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I agree. And I've been one of those marketers who have, I say, birthed brands in boardrooms.
Yeah.
It's never pretty. It's like an actual birth. It's messy, and the child doesn't. You generally grow up to be very successful, is what I found. You send it to a fancy school, and you try to give it all that you can with trade support and marketing dollars, and ultimately it flunks out of grammar school because consumers can sniff out a fake pretty fast. And so, yes, there have been plenty of examples of brands that have gone on to be successful without a legitimate story. But I think consumers want authenticity.
Now more than ever.
Yes, and they're looking for those snackable stories that they can share with their friends of why they're purchasing the product that they are. So I think being able to tell that story in a world where consumers are getting 800,000 messages a day, and those messages are often coming from influencers now, is the marketer's dilemma today. But I prefer to work on brands that have a soul and a story to tell.
So let's talk about influencers for a second. That's a good point, because there's such a proliferation of obvious, hey, you're paying me, I'm reading off of a a few copy points that you give me, and I'm going to shill, maybe not even a brief, maybe it's 3 or 4 bullets, and I'm going to be an obvious, shill for whatever brand it is. Talk about the challenges of finding influencers who have a meaningful connection or a meaningful potential association with the brand, but also themselves have that level of authenticity, because I think there's so many marketers that we work with who are sorting through, like, how do I make sense of what influencer do I want? How do I go find them? How do we make this look authentic and make it look not so obvious on what it is we're trying to do?
Right. Yeah. I'll give you an example of what we did with Hoppy Refresher, because I think Hoppy was a great example. Lagunitas, known for being the #1 IPA in the world. IPA was in decline. Beer was in decline. Lagunitas was in decline. We knew we needed to come out with products that had a growth trajectory. So Hoppy Refresher is still very successful, a hopped sparkling water that literally the brewers had created a couple of years ago because they put hops in anything they can. And we hadn't put any money behind it. It was growing double digits. So marketers look at it and say, oh, let's go screw this up and put some money behind it. Actually successful.
We can't help ourselves.
Yeah, we can. We've got to touch this.
Right.
But we knew that it was going to be a very different target market to speak to. We didn't want to go after the same guy in Oregon with a beard and a plaid shirt is probably not going to drink an IPA, is probably not going to be as interested in Hoppy Refresher. So it started with who's our consumer target and how are we going to appeal to them emotionally? What is going to motivate them to purchase Hoppy Refresher? And for us, there were a couple different consumer segments. Certainly the easy one is, let's go to people who, don't drink alcohol. Well, are you going to go to them because they're sober and in recovery? Or are you going to go to them or target them because they're parents of young children and they have to get up 16 times in the middle of the night? Or because they're an athlete and they are training for a marathon the next day? And so let's take the latter 2 examples. If they're a parent or an athlete, the way that we looked at influencers is it had nothing to do with their beer credentials. It had everything to do with those credentials that would resonate with the consumers that we were trying to target. So is it a mom who has a large following of women with young children who can speak about this product and how it relates to that life stage for her. Is that an athlete, not a world-class marathon runner, but, maybe a chubby mom who's running her first marathon that I'm going to relate to because that's really hard for me to do. And I want to try this Happy Refresher because it's really difficult to get out and run that 10-mile run for my first marathon. And maybe I want to reward myself with Happy Refresher, down to the last person who I'm not in recovery, but I've stopped drinking alcohol, but I still want to have something in my hand when I go out to dinner with my girlfriends and not feel like a leper. So I will associate with those people. So that's how I look at it, because otherwise it's just so overwhelming. I mean, at Mezzetta, our target market is anyone who eats good food. So that's a lot of people. It's different occasions, and there's a lot of other ways we look at it. But I always look at how are we going to appeal to our consumers emotionally the fastest. And I don't look at mega influencers, really. I look at a lot more micro.
Okay. It's been amazing to me in my experience how many people have gotten it wrong. But I think there's a lot of, with influencers, the people who are doing it right, in my experience, also really get into this idea of co-creation. Like, don't just give somebody the copy points to read off, but actually put the brand in their hands and let them tell the story from their perspective. That seems to really be a much more genuine way to do it. And I think as marketers, we like to so often assume that we understand the target because we've done our research, but that doesn't mean that we know how to talk and connect with the target. And that's really getting those right influencers is so critical.
Yeah, and letting go of control a little. It's so scary. But
Exactly.
when you do release that control, I'm thinking of a spot we did with Happy Refresher where the influencer was jumping on a trampoline and doing flips and then drinking a Happy Refresher, and it was so impactful.
Yeah.
And never in my wildest dreams would I tell someone to go do that. And
Here's an idea.
Spot, right?
Go get on the trampoline. Yeah, exactly. I want to talk a little bit about PAX, because working for a startup in, like you said, a very highly regulated, wild west environment. Talk to me about the educational challenge, the educational component with PAX, whether it's working around the stigma of cannabis or the variety of products that PAX had. What a unique challenge at such a, at that very infant stage of cannabis.
Yep. So I worked, just to set the stage, I worked for PAX between 2018 and 2020, so pre-pandemic. At that time, the fastest growing consumer segment of cannabis users were boomers. And I think, first of all, there's a lot of misnomers in cannabis that even today, because at that time there were only 13 legal states. Now I think there's 20 plus. Even today, though, people think that people that use cannabis are, the guy living in the basement of his mom's house and he's, 30 years old eating too many Cheetos and watching Beavis and Butthead, right? But the top 3 reasons consumers use cannabis are sleep, anxiety, and pain. So you have an older consumer that is looking for relief. And you need to quickly communicate to them how your product is safe because it's a consumable, and how it will quickly provide them the relief that they're seeking. Oh, but wait, you can't advertise on Instagram or Facebook because you're prohibited from it.
Right.
Now you have, one arm tied behind your back for one reason, another arm tied behind your back for another reason. And you also can't communicate any of these benefits in your advertising. That's also prohibited.
Outside of that, no.
Oh, and you can't show flower. Can't show the product.
So there's so much upside here. Tell me about what you said. Yes, this is right for me. This is what I want to do.
But I believe in the power of that plant to heal communities, and I have since I was 16 years old. And I am proud to say that. I am a proud cannabis consumer. And I think if people put down pharmaceuticals and picked up a little bit more plant, the world would be a happier place. So I went there with a mission, and I wanted more working parents and more people that look like me to be comfortable stating the same, right? So I went in there very mission driven that we could be a force for good in cannabis. And so what we our goal, and when I arrived about 6 months into it, we were able to secure our first underwriter's laboratory safety certification.
Hmm.
Anyone who has a hair dryer or any electronic
Yeah.
device, you've got the little UL
Yeah. Yeah.
certification.
Yeah.
That's a really big deal in consumer electronics in terms of safety. And in the cannabis industry, especially the vaporizers, so people
Hmm.
that aren't familiar with PAX, it's a vaporizer. And if I always associate it with razors and razor blades. So PAX is the razor blade handle, and then the razor are these cartridges filled with oil. There's both flour versions and then oil versions, but the oil is the one that really took off. So this vaporizer was the first one of its kind to be certified by Underwriters Laboratories, which was a big deal because the majority of them, they're all manufactured in China, but the
Right.
majority of them are not regulated. The cartridges are not regulated. And then you had a serious issue where you had fake cartridges being sold in the black market with acetate oils in it that were killing people. So we had a massive, not PAX cartridges, but we had a massive PR disaster
Yes.
in the industry on our
In
hands.
in an industry that already had a lot of
Yeah,
mistrust. I mean, there's a
exactly.
lot. Yeah.
Exactly. So we came out with a campaign that was all about, motivating trust with the consumer and educating them about the power of the plant, but also the power of understanding how safe a consumable could be
Hmm.
until COVID hit. And then you
Hmm.
have a respiratory pandemic in the
Right.
middle of when you're trying to market a consumable that goes through your lungs. So it was disaster number 3 within the industry and
Yeah.
especially that sector. So the campaign was called Every Detail Matters, and it was all about, trying to break down fundamentally about everything. Our designers and developers are from Google, and we manufacture this way, and really breaking it all down. But candidly, once the pandemic hit, we stopped all advertising because you can't promote inhaling cannabis
Right.
when people are wearing masks
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah. Wow.
Mhm.
You just can't make some of this
Mhm.
stuff up. I'll just say
No.
that.
I left in July 2020. It's just sometimes you've got to say, you got to know, as
Yeah.
Kenny Rogers, the dearly departed Kenny Rogers, you got to know when to hold him and know
Yes.
when to fold him.
Totally.
I
Totally.
folded him and went to beer, a category that was in decline, but that's a story for another day.
So, a couple more questions for you. Number one, what stories out there? Normally, I ask normally I asked, what do we see in overabundance? What do we see? What do we not see enough of in terms of stories that we need from a marketer's perspective? Like, I think that there's a lot of tropes out there that people continually fall into, but what stories are we not seeing enough of?
Female founders in CPG.
Love it.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
So one of the brands that I consulted with when prior to joining Mezzetta is a brand called Euphorics, and
Mhm.
founded by a woman named Jen Bachelor, who is an icon. She's brilliant. She founded this functional beverage called Kin. And, I've always worked, with the exception of PAX, at really large, well-funded machines that, you don't worry about how you're going to pay for your next production run because you have a Fortune 500 publicly traded company
Right.
behind you. And
Right.
your biggest dilemma is, if Betty in accounting is going to process your purchase order in time, not if you can get the funding, or if your latest funding round is going to close, or if your check's going to clear, or if you're going to make the decision to clear payroll or
Right.
fund your next production round. So
Right.
I think there's been a tremendous amount of effort for a lot of communities to get store shelf placements, but I
Mhm.
think female founders in CPG is still a huge
Way
opportunity. And
underrepresented.
yeah, and I applaud. I think Target's doing a great job.
Mhm.
I think Sephora
They
is
are.
doing a great
Yes.
job. But I think there's a lot more to be had. And I think there are so many amazing products out there. Sprouts is another one that takes chances on brands early in their life
They do.
stages.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think women have a lot of great ideas that never see the light of day. So I wish that there were more incubators to help get those products to market.
I love it. Okay, last question. How do you see great storytelling evolving over the next, let's say, 5 years? What do you think the biggest changes are going to be? A lot of ways you could take this.
Yeah. The next 5 years are going to be very interesting about how people take back platforms, because the platforms are now very controlled by political parties' affiliations, right? So there's a lot of talk, and it doesn't matter which side you're on.
Right.
This isn't political to me, but we choose to listen to, confirmation bias, right?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
You're going to subscribe to the New York Times, or you're going to go on Twitter, depending on what you want to hear.
Whichever echo chamber you want to go on to.
Exactly. Right. So I think what will be interesting, and I've talked to many people over the last couple of weeks about just, am I misinformed? Am I living in this San Francisco bubble? Like, how come everyone doesn't think like me?
Right.
And what do I need to read? And what stories do I need to hear? And how do I need to become better informed to maybe better understand the 71 million Americans that didn't vote like me?
Yeah.
And instead of being angry or upset, right? So I think that's also the storytelling of that. So how do we break through right now? What are the traditional media outlets for people or brands to tell stories in companies or platforms that don't exist? And then you got to throw AI into it, right? So if we want legitimate stories that are unbiased by political affiliation, how does AI play a role in that? Or does it
is it a headwind? Exactly. Man, it's going to be a hell of a ride, but it'll be interesting to watch from a marketer's perspective. Paige, this has been awesome. You have an amazing history, and I love the battles you've fought, the wars you've won, and you have a heck of a lot to be proud of. So this has just been an awesome conversation. So really appreciate you being generous with your time today.
Of course, my pleasure. I enjoy chatting with you, John, as always, and I think your agency is doing great work, so keep it up.
Thanks, Paige. Appreciate it. Giant Stories is a production of Medium Giant and our parent company, the Dallas News Corporation. Interested in learning more about how your brand's story can be better told and sold? Visit mediumgiant.co or send an email to hello@mediumgiant.co.